Robert Plank Show, episode 305. Boost your confidence, get more opportunities, and discover deals with negotiation consultant Kwame Christian. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Our guest today is Kwame Christian. My name is Robert Plank, and you're listening who you are, whoever you are. And Kwame, our guest today, is a business lawyer and the founder of the American Negotiation Institute. And Kwame is passionate about teaching entrepreneurs and business professionals the art of negotiation. His goal is to help you get better deals and advance your career. So, Mr. Kwame, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm super glad that you're here. I appreciate you. I'm excited to jump on in and hear about who you are and what you're all about. So this whole negotiation thing, I mean, is this what you do? Is this your specialty?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I'm passionate about. And even though I was a practicing lawyer, I really enjoy teaching people how to negotiate and be more persuasive and go in on deals as a negotiation consultant. So I just went all in on that aspect of the business, and it's been going really well.
Awesome. So, as far as like when you help businesses and you help business owners kind of get these better deals, I mean, where are people really struggling? What's sort of the jumping off point for people here who maybe are listening and saying, I need help with this whole negotiation thing, but I'm not really sure kind of where to start?
Yeah, I think the what people don't realize is how many opportunities they have to negotiate day to day. And so my definition of a negotiation is anytime you're in a conversation and somebody in the conversation wants something. And so when you think about it that way, we're negotiating all the time. And we're negotiating at home, in our personal relationships, and at work. And if we're entrepreneurs in our businesses. So if you're an entrepreneur, you could be negotiating your prices. A lot of times entrepreneurs fail to recognize that they could get a higher price by negotiating more effectively, and if necessary, if they need to lower their price in order to keep a client, they can still retain value by being more creative in those deals, because there are multiple ways to retain value when it comes to negotiations. It's not just money, but a lot of times we only focus on the money.
Right, and there's a lot of sort of light bulbs going off in my head as you're explaining some of those sort of case studies for entrepreneurs, because I can definitely relate to some of those kinds of things, like selling a product or a course, kind of dealing with maybe being bullied by customers, or maybe like having that low confidence and feeling that maybe the price has to be kind of low, or in a freelance sort of situation, if you're putting out like a quote for a job, feeling that kind of low self-esteem and feeling that sort of need to be liked or need for a deal to go through, and maybe people could be sort of selling themselves short. And so in all these kind of situations, I mean, what are some of these solutions? Like, how can people get over this problem of maybe not getting those prices or not getting those deals that they want?
The first thing people need to recognize is that in order to negotiate effectively, you need to be confident. And the best way to get confidence is to learn more about the situation. And one of my favorite sayings is, competence breeds confidence. So you need to go out there and learn as much as you can. And if you're an entrepreneur and somebody's coming to you as a client, you need to be the authority in that field. You need to have a better understanding of the market and what the person needs than they do. And once you recognize that you have more information than they do, that'll make you feel a lot more prepared. And so it's something I tell my audience all the time is you. Success and failure in these negotiations isn't predicated upon your ability to think quickly on your feet and come up with witty retorts. It's really predicated upon your ability to prepare thoroughly beforehand. And so I have a free negotiation guide on my website, americannegotiationinstitute.com/prep. You could get a free negotiation preparation guide, because when it comes to these negotiations, the person who is most prepared is the person who's going to win. So the first thing you need to do to make sure you don't devalue your services is making sure that you don't devalue yourself and you have the confidence in yourself to get the deal that you deserve.
Awesome. So have the confidence, and that's very reassuring in that we don't have to be sort of slick salespeople and have just the right saying, as long as we're prepared and understand their needs. So can we unpack that a little bit? Sort of the idea of doing a little bit of that research beforehand, and if we're going into some kind of deal, knowing what they're going through and knowing what their needs are, so we can help them. So like, what's sort of the action to be taken, or what's your advice in that area?
Absolutely. Yeah. Here's the kind of level of research I'm talking about. I put people through what I call the dating test. So I ask myself, how much would I want to know about this person if I wanted to date them? And that takes the type of preparation you do to a whole new level. So you're looking at their LinkedIn, there's all of their social media, so Twitter, Facebook, blogs, interviews that they've done. You want to see what types of things make them tick and the things that they care about and things that they really dislike. Because every conversation we have is riddled with landmines that we don't know exist. And sometimes we might inadvertently say something that offends somebody. And if we did some research, we might have been able to figure out, hey, I should avoid this topic. And so that's the first thing. You want to do as much research on the person and the situation as you can. And then you just want to be curious. So again, like I said, this is an information game. So my goal is to learn as much as possible, but there's only so much that I can learn before the negotiation begins. And so that part of one of the most important parts of my preparation is figuring out what I don't know that I need to know. And when I recognize that gap in my knowledge, that's when I create a list of open-ended questions that I could ask during the conversation so I could gather more information even during the conversation.
And so, just to make sure that we all kind of understand this, do you have an example or a case study of this where you kind of had a deal coming up and you did all this sort of research and then figured out those questions to ask yourself to help your knowledge out? Any sort of case study like that?
Yeah, there are a couple that come to mind. One good example is there was a negotiation I was doing while I was practicing law. One of my clients was buying a business, and so I was negotiating with the opposing counsel. And so I was trying to obviously get a low price, and they were trying to get a higher price. And before the negotiation began, I found this person's blog, and I read I read every blog post going back 3 years, which I think most people would find a little bit excessive, but I found something out that was really important. So I have a son, 18 months old, and whenever I'm meeting people, I think, and I know they have children. I talk about my son to make that human connection. It's like, hey, you have a child, I have a child. Let's talk about that experience, because I want to build as much rapport as possible. So I knew he had a daughter, but when I did my research, I discovered he had a son that I didn't know about. And it turned out that his son died in infancy. And so, because of that, I didn't do the typical thing that I do to build rapport. I completely skipped that. I didn't talk about my son at all because I thought that could bring up those negative emotions that of that difficult time that he had when his son died around my son's age. And so if I wouldn't have done that research, I would have walked into a landmine and had no idea why what I said changed the tenor of the conversation. But because I took the time and did that research, I was able to avoid that situation and make sure the entirety of the conversation was positive.
And that's an awesome story, just as far as like that, just hitting home that what you don't say is just as important as what you do say. And so you mentioned that you looked at all this stuff and you read all of his blog posts going back 3 years. And is there such a thing as maybe like too much research like this, or like at what point does it become either like maybe stalking or like a waste of your time? Like when does it become too much research?
Yeah, what you'll realize is you'll get to a point where information starts to become repetitive. So you don't want to, like, once you get to that point and you're starting to see pretty consistent patterns, you could start to chill at that point. Also, there are going to be time constraints, and so even though I read 3 months, 3 years worth of blogs, it probably took me about half an hour, 45 minutes, not too much time. And so when I kind of did the cost benefit analysis, I was like, well, there's a lot of good information in here. It would be worth that investment of time. Because not only am I looking for those landmines, but I'm also looking for the types of things that the person enjoys, the types of things that motivates the person. And so now, even though I have my points that I want to make, I can make it in a voice that they would recognize, using words that they would appreciate. And so it's not using my buzzwords, I'm using their buzzwords because it's easier for them to understand and it makes my points a lot easier to digest.
Awesome. So this is making more and more sense to me. So you're reading to get sort of a feel for them, or to get those connections and get sort of their language, so you can mirror that a little bit and figure out kind of what motivates them, and all that kind of cool stuff like that. And so once you have the information, you kind of alluded a little bit there that like usually like do a certain kind of thing to get rapport and things like that. So do you have like a sequence in place when you're negotiating or meeting someone or something that this sort of adjusts? Like, is there sort of a method to the madness, or do you just get a feel for it, or kind of how does that part go?
It's a little bit of a feel type of thing. And I think it's important to prepare in a systematic method, but I don't think it's very helpful to try and approach the negotiations in a rigid form, because these conversations can go in many different ways. And the way that I negotiate, it's like I said, it's all about information. My goal is to get as much as possible. And so I get that by asking open-ended questions. And the beauty about that is that, as opposed to closed-ended questions, the person needs to elaborate in order to respond effectively. And that's a great thing because it leads me to get more information, but at the same time, it leads me down paths that I wasn't expecting. And so, an important part about my negotiation style is the recognition that I need to be flexible and being comfortable with almost letting them lead the conversation in a sense with regard to they are the people giving me the information and I need to adjust to it, but also knowing that since I'm the one asking questions, I'm in control. And so there's a little bit of a method to the madness because, I like to be the person in control with asking the questions, but I also need to be flexible. So an important thing to notice is that with these conversations, you don't need to feel obligated to come to a conclusion during the first conversation. You can get some information and then adjust because, like I said, it's all about preparation. You don't need to be super quick on your feet. Sometimes you get information and you say, well, I didn't see, this is new to me. Give me a second. Let me think about this and let's chat about this tomorrow. And so again, it takes away that pressure to be quick on your feet or feel the need to come to a quick conclusion. You can come back, reanalyze, readjust, and then come back to the conversation at a later time.
Awesome. So also very reassuring. So if we have the information beforehand and we kind of come prepared, then we have a good starting point. If we ask those open-ended questions, then the conversation is all about them, but at the same time, we're in control and we can kind of figure out where things lead to. And we also don't need to have that pressure to answer something right away, because if that's new information that you didn't have, you can say, all right, well, we'll adjust for that, or we'll table that and come back to that later on. And so, I mean, I'm really liking our conversations so far, Mr. Kwame, just because like a lot of the people who listen are, I guess, like my crowd sort of. There's a lot of like computer geeks and people like that, and I feel like I'm pretty socially awkward myself, and so this is sort of helping. And so one thing that this kind of makes me think about is as far as like I've been wanting to do in my business more like one-on-one stuff and get more like high-ticket clients and websites for people like that. And so, I mean, what advice would you give to maybe me or like our kind of crowd, where a lot of the times we're kind of hiding behind the computer screen, and maybe some of us are going to be making some like outbound calls to like local businesses to see if they need services and stuff like that. So, do you have any specific advice for people who are kind of maybe stuck in their shell and trying to be more of like a phone talker, or more of like one-on-one negotiator kind of person?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to practice. We need to get out there and try. And so, one of the things I always tell my audience in my podcast, Negotiate Anything, is that you need to engage in rejection therapy because, of course, like I said, the best way to get confidence is through competence, learning, but the other way is through practice. And so, with rejection therapy, what I do is I ask for things that I think I have not I think, I know I have no right to get. And so, for instance, it would be going to a coffee shop and getting my coffee and then saying, hey, since I'm a loyal customer, could I get a free pastry along with that? I have no right for a free, a free pastry. But I'm going to ask anyway, because two things could happen. First, I could get that free pastry, and that's pretty awesome. The second thing is I could get rejected, and then something amazing happens. I become desensitized to rejection. And one of the main barriers that people face when it comes to negotiation is that they are afraid to take that step forward. They're afraid to ask because they're afraid of rejection. And so rejection therapy is the best way to start to get over that. We need to jump into these conversations and start to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And what you'll find is you'll start to become a lot more confident navigating these waters when it comes to negotiation.
Awesome, and I imagine that that sort of asking for things you have no right to ask sort of also train. I mean, it sounds like it would be like a great confidence booster and trains us to ask for what we want and go for what we want as opposed to settling for kind of what gets handed to us.
Exactly. Yeah, because every negotiation starts with an ask. We need to be asking for something. And that's usually where most people fail. And so that's where rejection therapy comes in. And now the next step too, especially if you're selling something like software or services where it's not entirely clear what the overhead is, as opposed to a product where we know that we have a certain amount of overhead, like the cost of the product is I don't know, $200 and we're trying to sell it for at least 250 or 300. A lot of times the pricing structure is a little bit nebulous when it comes to services and software. So this gives us a really great opportunity to negotiate. And so what I would suggest doing is coming up with the highest price that you can reasonably justify. Because we did our research, we should have a good understanding of what the customer needs, and then we would say to ourselves, what is the most value that I could pack into an offering? So it could be coaching plus unlimited email access plus maybe 3 or 4 coaching calls, whatever it is. You make it as value packed as possible and create the highest price package that you could reasonably justify. And then once somebody says, oh, okay, well, that's a lot more than I anticipated, that's when you seek a counter offer. One of the biggest mistakes that we make is when we hear somebody balk at the price, we start to negotiate against ourselves. We can't do their jobs for them. At that time, what I would say is I would seek a counter. So, okay, I understand that. What kind of budget are we working with then? And so now that is going to be their counteroffer. We're going to get an idea of what they can afford. And what's psychologically happening here is because we've created a higher price point than what they were thinking, psychologically they're going to expand their budget and come closer to us because we set a higher number. They're going to say a higher number than what they typically would have. And so what we do at that point is we can discount our services by removing things. We don't just discount our services in a blanket form. We say, okay, in this value packed offer, you had X, Y, and Z. For the price that you mentioned, I could give you X and Y, but not Z. And you have to concede according to plan. You never just wing it. After they give their budget, say, okay, let me think about this. Let me get back to you. And then you can come back with your counter. And you just kind of play this game back and forth. But again, it takes practice to become comfortable in these types of conversations.
Awesome, and you gave us a few minutes ago that technique of asking for too much to get that practice and to get comfortable. And so I really like those couple of techniques there. Have that really high priced offer with as much stuff in there as you can have in there. That way the other end of that deal they sort of expand or enlarge the price that they're going to have, and then when you kind of meet in the middle, you just discount things. But as you said, don't just discount the price, remove a few things out of that package. And so, as you were sort of describing those sorts of things, it kind of made me wonder, like, do you have any kind of like a library of like some like things in your back pocket to kind of fix the negotiation or make it go the way that you go? Because there's that technique, and you've mentioned that you have the story about your son to get rapport. So do you have any like sort of like resources like that you use over and over again in these negotiations?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that I use is the prep guide, the one that I mentioned earlier at AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com /prep. And it's like that is a more compact version of the negotiation preparation guide I go through. The one that I go through every time is probably like 6 pages long, and it lists out the various tactics that I've learned, so I can kind of pick a la carte what I think would be the best for each scenario. But I think that prep guide would be a good start. But the beautiful thing about the study of negotiation is that there's no end to the amount of knowledge that you can get in this. It's incredible. And so you're constantly learning. Even the people who have been doing this for a long time, we have to remain students of the game because new information, new tactics, new strategies are always coming out. And that's what's so fun for me. And I'm sure you feel this way as a podcaster, bringing people on to talk about these topics. It's just endlessly fun because people see things differently. They have a different spin on their strategies. And what I do is every time I have a guest come on and I learn something new, I add a little bit to my repertoire.
Yeah, and not only that, not only adding stuff to your repertoire there, but also like it seems like as we kind of get deeper and deeper into our craft or get more into the advanced things, we seem to like forget those fundamentals or forget those reminders of just like the simple stuff. And sometimes people can get super crazy with some of their techniques and then forget just the the basic strategy behind that kind of stuff. And so I mean sort of along those lines, in all the like negotiations you've done and like been a part of and seen the other side and coached others and stuff like that, have you seen like a number one universal mistake when it comes to deal making and negotiating and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'd say from my experience and what I've heard from other people is that the biggest mistake we can make is going into these conversations thinking we have all of the answers and lacking the necessary curiosity to find the right deal. Because negotiation isn't the art of deal making, it's the art of deal discovery. And we can't go in there thinking we know exactly where the deal is going to be because the deal might not even be there. And so we need to go in these conversations with curiosity, asking those questions to see if a deal exists. And when I negotiate, my goal is to keep the breakdown of conversation probably 70-30, where I am speaking 30% of the time and listening the other 70% of the time. And what the mistake that most people make is that they come in and they already have these preconceived notions of the way the negotiation is going to go. But that's incorrect because we never know. And so we need to go in with curiosity, listen more than we speak, and kind of like I said, be comfortable with the fact that we don't know where these conversations are going to go.
Awesome. Tons of good advice right there. So listen 70% of the time, speak 30% of the time, and ask questions to figure out if there is a deal to be made. And you mentioned sort of closer to the top of the call here that there's that thing called the dating test where you kind of do some research on a person to see if you date them. And this negotiation in particular sounds like it's like dating in its own kind of form, right? As far as like it's about them and you're asking them questions and you're finding out if you and them are a good fit. So even like I'm just picturing all these analogies kind of getting into my head as you're sort of explaining the way that you go into this whole deal discovery thing.
Exactly. Because imagine if you were on a date and the person kept on telling you, just talking to you, just talking and talking and talking, and didn't ask you anything about yourself, didn't ask about your situation. The waiter comes to take your order and they order for you because they think they know what's best for you. You're not going to feel very good about that. You're not going to want to continue this relationship. And if that person asks for something, you're not going to be very keen to give them what they want because you are not convinced that they care about what you want. And so I think it's great that you're recognizing that the rules of the game still kind of apply to to dating as well, because yeah, you need to show that you are interested in the other person rather than trying to make yourself seem interesting or selling.
Right, really good advice. Like, it's a two-way street. And I think we've all been not only on dates like that, and also been at seminars and talking to people like that and things like that, where either they wouldn't be quiet about how great they were and you can't even get a word in, or even where like they'll be super asking questions about you and not really revealing anything about them. So I mean, lots of great stuff there as far as like it is a two-way street. It's not all about you. Lots of really helpful reminders there. And so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but you mentioned your book and your website and your podcast. So if people listen to our discussion today about negotiations and about deals and stuff like that, what website or websites should someone go to find out more about you and what you do and what you have to offer?
Yeah, so the best place to check out some of the work is the American Negotiation Institute. So you can see the all of the podcasts and check out some of the training resources and the coaching opportunities we have there. Also, if people with me on LinkedIn, just put in my name, Kwame Christian. You can connect with me, and everybody gets a personalized message. It might take me a while because I'm getting a lot of them now, but everybody gets a message because with my podcast, Negotiate Anything. I want to make sure that I am being as practical as possible with this information. And sometimes with me and my academic approach and me being so close to the material, I can get wrapped up into the minutia where the average person listening, it might not have that much value. And so I always ask people what they want to hear and what they're struggling with so it can kind of guide me when it comes to the content on the podcast. So definitely reach out and definitely check out that negotiation guide at americannegotiationinstitute.com/prep. That'll be a great way to get started when you have your next negotiation and you can be more prepared.
Awesome, great stuff. So everyone should go right now to americannegotiationinstitute.com/prep and get the guide there and subscribe to Kwame's podcast, Negotiate Anything. Message him on LinkedIn to get that personalized response. Because what would be the point of sending out a cookie cutter response to everything if it's all about the negotiation and that two way? So it sounds like you really practice what you preach. So thanks for stopping by the podcast today, Mr. Kwame, and sharing what you had to share with us. And like you said, it's really great to hear about this kind of stuff and not get lost in the minutia or like the terms or all the jargon. And then it's also great to kind of on the other kind of end of that spectrum to get some of this concrete advice, some of these tips, because some people kind of are like natural socialites and natural negotiators. So it's good to have this sort of these concrete tools to plug in whether we're born with these kind of skills or not. So AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com. And thanks, Kwame, for stopping by the show and sharing what you had to share today.
My pleasure. It was a blast.
Subscribe to us right now while it's still fresh on your mind at robertplank.com/iTunes or just search Robert Plank in your iTunes app.